It's a question that's been occasionally asked on my channel from time to time. It's a question that not only have I myself wondered over the years that I've been uploading content to YouTube, but it's something that I now feel I can give a definite answer to. What is the worst video I've ever uploaded to my YouTube channel? Now, as a content creator on YouTube, you don't often ask yourself this question because in the back of your mind, you always want to have the feeling that every video you upload is a good one, which in many cases that can be seen through how your audience responds to it. When people enjoy what you upload, they'll often like it and maybe even share it on some form of social media. Of course, the comments a video receives can also reflect how good it is and show whether or not people enjoy it as well. In this instance, however, nothing that I just said would have made any difference. This is the story of how a fun little crossover video with a fellow YouTuber turned into a video which would ultimately lead to many problems over the course of the next year. On August 28, 2021, during a meetup I had with my friend Zack, who has a YouTube channel called Zardar, we headed to the town of DuBois, Pennsylvania to a hobby shop I'd been going to for years. This was a shop I first visited back in 2004 when I was 10 years old and just starting to get into model railroading. As a kid, you can imagine how much I enjoyed this place, and that over the years I acquired a lot of model railroading equipment here. Even when I became an adult and moved away from model trains for a while, I still came here for other hobby supplies and in recent years, die-cast replicas. Even when I just happened to be in the area, I would still find myself swinging by this shop, even if it was just to look around and talk with the guys that worked there. If you wanted a hobby shop with a vast amount of inventory, friendly customer service, and a great atmosphere, this was the place to go. Zack and I spent a good 2 hours here looking around and taking video of the shop and various inventory they had, most notably their large amount of older inventory from the Thomas & Friends brand. Everything here was mint in the packages and being sold at great prices. Some of this stuff you couldn't even find on sites like eBay, let alone mint in the packages and for such a great deal. This is where I acquired a lot of the Ertls for my collection, and not only did I not have to pay a ridiculous price to do so, but I also supported a small local business by shopping here. Even Zack was amazed at just how much new old stock this hobby shop had, and considering he didn't have anything like this back where he lived in Louisiana, it was a great experience for him to be able to pay a visit to this hobby shop. He even said,
Going to the hobby shop for the first time was a very awesome, surreal experience. I've never seen a shop like that before in my life, especially down home in Louisiana, in which the best thing that we have is a Hobby Lobby with one aisle of train stuff. I was completely amazed and impressed that the walls were littered with trains, hundreds of trains everywhere. From floor to ceiling, they had it all. I even called my mom to tell her about it. I was so excited. Even more impressive was the large collection of retro stock from Fisher Price, Wooden Railway, and Earl Thomas toys. I hadn't seen anything like that in probably well over 10 years. These items, they're not even manufactured anymore. And at this shop, they're literally sitting right there on the shelf, mint in the box, pretty much at their original retail price. My only regret was I couldn't take more of them with me. I ended up buying a Rosie and some Lionel Christmas ornaments, but there was so much more that I wanted to take, and now I regret not doing it. I just couldn't believe that this little shop in a rural town in Pennsylvania had so many hard to find Thomas stock just sitting there.
Zack was most interested in the wooden railway inventory they had and picked up a few things to add to his collection as well. We both had a great time that day hanging out at the hobby shop and talking with the guys, and we also purchased a lot of great items. Zack had plans to come back next year to purchase more wooden railway for his collection, but unfortunately he would never get the chance to do so. In fact, this was honestly the last time either of us can say we genuinely enjoyed going to this hobby shop. Within the next day, the video was uploaded to YouTube, and not long after airing, it got quite a bit of attention, and the owner of the hobby shop even shared it to their Facebook page and thanked us for stopping by. Little did Zack and I know, however, that this video would set in motion many sketchy events at this shop over the course of the next year. A couple days after the video aired, I got a message from my friend Christian, known as Terrence the Tractor 525 here on YouTube, and he wanted to ask about checking out the hobby shop for himself. Considering we weren't able to meet up in the summer of this year like we originally planned, he suggested we try to meet up the weekend of October 9th since he had time off work to do so. Considering my friend Eddie, who's known as Captain Rolls here on YouTube, had planned to meet up with me this year as well, the three of us decided to hang out that weekend together. However, Christian had a friend who wanted to go to the hobby shop as well, and he told Christian to give him a ride since he was already making the trip to Pennsylvania anyways. As much as I'd love to name and shame this individual for the trouble they caused, I'll be the bigger man here and just refer to them as Max for the rest of the video. Because Christian was traveling further than Eddie and I figured I'd let him make plans to start with and we'd all go from there. After discussing among the three of us, the plan we had was pretty much straightforward. Christian would get here early in the morning to meet up with Eddie and I, we'd all head to DuBois to the hobby shop for a couple hours, and then go to lunch before heading back to my place. In the afternoon, we'd hang out in the workshop and later go to the local pub for dinner and a few drinks before going back to my house to just relax the rest of the evening and maybe do a live chat here on YouTube. Christian decided to leave at nighttime, which would get him back home in the early hours of the morning, if not before. Somewhere throughout the day, the three of us also had plans to make a couple of vlogs and other videos together, but literally nothing we had planned would happen. Things kept changing several times up until just before the big meetup. Like I said earlier, Christian's friend Max wanted to go to the hobby shop as well. I was all for this idea at first, as I knew who Max was and I thought it'd be great to have him join our group for the weekend. However, one of the first issues was that the three of us were meeting up in northwestern Pennsylvania, while Max could only get as far as southeastern Pennsylvania. This quickly became the least of our problems when Max had several arguments with Christian in regards to being around Eddie and I. As I'm sure we're all aware, there were things going on throughout 2020 clear into 2022 that some people took very seriously, and Max was no exception to this. He even complained to Christian that he was irresponsible to be hanging around Eddie and I, and that if Christian took him to my place, he wasn't getting out of the car. Just my personal opinion, but if you're that concerned about it, then it's probably better to just stay home. Furthermore, Max was not part of the original meetup plan and had invited himself. Why should the rest of us who've already agreed on something completely change things just because his views were different than ours? In addition to this, Max was making this trip for only one reason, and that reason was not to spend the day with friends. Unfortunately, there was no way of getting Max to consent to the original meetup plan the three of us had already agreed upon. Instead, he manipulated Christian into completely changing our plans by guilt-tripping him and playing the friendship card. Soon, a new meetup plan, if you could even call it that now, was put in place. Christian would leave his house early in the morning and drive to pick up Max, then drive to DuBois to drop him off at the hobby shop. From there, he'd then drive to my place to hang out with Eddie and I for an hour, then drive back to DuBois to pick up Max and make the trip back home. You can imagine that both Eddie and I were pissed about how what had begun as a meetup with three fellow YouTubers spending the day together had been condensed down to 1 hour. Unfortunately, I felt like this was the plan and we had to just try and roll with it, but looking back on it now, I should have just called the whole thing off the moment Max started throwing tantrums like a toddler and taking advantage of Christian. This new meetup plan made no sense anyways. For Christian to drive straight to my place would have been about 6 hours, roughly 340 miles. For him to drive from his place to pick up Max and then drive to my place was going to be around 8 hours, roughly 440 miles. To bring Max along was literally adding another 2 hours onto the trip, not to mention Christian would be driving an additional 100 miles out of his way to pick up Max. You would think Max would have tried to get a bus or a flight to DuBois to make things easier for Christian, but he didn't. Max wouldn't even pitch in some money for gas, claiming that he couldn't afford it. But in truth, he was just saving his money to spend at the hobby shop. Even with everything that had happened already, Max still continued acting like an entitled brat. A few days before the meetup, he began complaining that Christian should just meet Eddie and I somewhere in DuBois instead of driving all the way out to my place. The way he just continued acting like a toddler, wanting to have everything his way, only made me regret ever agreeing to any of this. It was as if Max wasn't already getting the upper hand of things and just wanted to see how much more he could get. Honestly, Christian should have just told Max he was no longer welcome the moment he started acting like a selfish cretin. Instead, he was allowed to get away with his appalling behavior and was never once told no. Everything was completely thrown out the window just to accommodate a so-called friend. That weekend, the big meetup did happen, but it was a complete waste. Eddie and I were stuck at my place because we couldn't go to the hobby shop while Max was there. Christian hardly spent an hour with us at my house, as he had to rush back to the hobby shop before Max got pissed off waiting for him. Eddie and I did manage to go the following Monday, but there really wasn't much left to choose from in terms of the Ertl stock. Some of the things Eddie and I had hopes of getting were completely gone, and there was a reason for this. To say I was disappointed after the meetup would be an understatement. I was honestly pissed off at Christian for letting Max take advantage of him like he did, and I was pissed off at Max for inviting himself and pulling everything in his favor. It wasn't until later on that Christian apologized and explained to me what exactly went down that weekend and why Max was so hell-bent on having things his way. To begin with, Max was flying all the way across the country to go to the hobby shop, and had planned this trip within a few weeks' time. When he finally got there, he spent well over $500 on a massive amount of Ertl items, including many duplicates. He picked over everything there and took what were some of the most sought-after items they had. Christian knew damn well this was Max's intentions, even telling me before the weekend, "I know Max is only making this trip because he wants to buy a lot of those Ertls." As if his intentions weren't bad enough, Max had lied to and took advantage of everyone to carry out his dissolute plan. He lied to his parents that he was going to Pennsylvania for work just so they would pay for his plane tickets. He had pushed Eddie and I out of the meetup just so he could have everything to himself for the taking. He took advantage of Christian, making him go out of his way to give him a ride, and then never even having the courtesy to reimburse him for the expenses he incurred. Max could spend over $500 at the hobby shop, yet apparently couldn't spare any money for gas or the tolls Christian had to pay to come get him. He was also very vindictive towards Christian on the way back home. Of course, all this happened after they left the hobby shop and Max had gotten what he came for. The only thing Christian got out of Max that day was lunch at a fast food restaurant, and that's the only thing Max did for anyone that weekend. When it was all said and done, the only person who made out in any of this was Max. He was the only one who got exactly what he wanted, while the rest of us got the short end of the deal. Max was hell-bent on making sure he got all those Ertls, and he didn't care who he had to push out of the way or screw over to get them. What had originally started out as an entire day with just 3 fellow YouTubers meeting up and having a great time had turned into a day all about Max. He didn't care about hanging out with friends or having a great day. He didn't care about doing projects together or making memories. Despite not even being invited to join in this meetup, much less wanting to be a part of it, he had pulled the entire thing in his favor, all just to scalp a bunch of toys from a rural hobby shop. Sadly, Max was not the only one who went to the hobby shop to scalp. There had been other people even outside of Pennsylvania who had come there and spent hundreds of dollars to purchase mass amounts of Ertl or wooden railway items in addition to some of the other underpriced inventory the shop had. These were all people who had seen the video Zack and I made and knew exactly where to look. Some of these people had even been in the hobby shop weeks before Christian and Max went, which just shows how quick some of them were to jump on the opportunity. As much as I hate the fact that Max scalped a bunch of the stock that he did, I will say that even if he hadn't, someone else would have. I wouldn't doubt there were some people that went in there who were genuine collectors and or hobbyists who bought a bunch of items for themselves, but it's pretty clear there were a lot of people who were going into the shop solely for the purpose of scalping. When Zack found out about this, he even said,
When Corey let me know that people were starting to scalp all the toys from the shop, I was very shocked, to say the least. I didn't think that this would happen as a result of our video. After all, the video itself really didn't pull that many views, about 200 or so. Not to mention, I even discussed in a live stream with Corey during that same week that scalping was bad and people should not do it.
After that weekend and after finding out what had gone down, I didn't go back to the hobby shop for the next year. This wasn't just because I didn't have the desire to, but also because I really didn't have a need to either. Even so, numerous things continued to happen over the course of the next year. Apparently not long after Max had scalped a bunch of stuff, the owner of the shop was asking the employees about the high number of sales and why the Thomas & Friends stock, in addition to other inventory, was flying off the shelves. They explained to him a lot of people had been coming in and buying mass amounts of items, which apparently the owner didn't take too well. Now, I do want to mention, the owner likes to get every cent he can, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, as there's no law against making a profit. Profits are good. However, the owner is also a businessman, and it does not take an expert to see the bigger picture when you have underpriced inventory and people are walking out of the store with bulk amounts of it. The owner knew people were scalping and told his employees he wanted prices marked up so he wasn't losing money. It's pretty clear the video brought a lot of riffraff into his store, but in my defense, he was the one who shared it to the shop's Facebook page. In fact, based on the low number of views the video got, I'm willing to bet more people saw it on Facebook than they did on YouTube. So thanks to people going in and scalping, what inventory that remains there now is marked up to where it's no longer a great deal, but instead prohibitively priced. In regards to the Ertls, for example, I picked up a James last year for $7.29 back when Zack and I went. Now the price is $15.99, and that's over double what it was being sold at before, not to mention you still have to pay tax on top of that. If you were to look around on eBay, you could definitely find the same thing for less, and in some cases that's even with the included shipping cost. Again, part of why I enjoyed coming to the shop in the first place was because the inventory was reasonably priced and I didn't have to pay a shipping cost to get it. Now, everything that's left there is the common stuff, and it's just not worth what the owner is asking. Unfortunately, it looks like the prices are there to stay, and it'll probably be another 10 to 15 years after the online prices go up that the hobby shop's prices will become reasonable again. Granted, I don't think the owner is going to let his guard down again, and the prices will more than likely be equivalent to what you'd pay online. So moving past the events that took place the weekend of October 9th, 2021, there were still people coming into the hobby shop and buying up the Thomas & Friends stock, but I think the owner's price increase at the time more than likely deterred the scalpers if any more came in. Still, there was a lot of stuff that sold throughout the year that I didn't go there, and I would only come to find this out during my next meetup with Zack. On August 18th, 2022, Zack, along with his brother Nick and I, met up again here in Pennsylvania. We headed back to DuBois to spend the afternoon at the hobby shop, and then later get dinner and a few drinks at a place called Doolittle Station, which was just down the road. When we walked into the shop, Zack was shocked at just how much of the Thomas & Friends stock was gone, especially considering how full the shelves were a year ago. He was also disappointed to see the wooden railway items had been picked over, and that several of the things he was hoping to purchase this time were all gone. He was also shocked to see the new prices on everything, even going as far to say,
It's a little too late. The scalpers already made off with the good stuff. The remaining items are not rare, so increasing their prices is only going to make them less likely to sell.
I'll admit I too was a little disappointed at what had become of the hobby shop in the last year, but I still tried to be positive while we were there. Zack, however, really didn't seem to have the same excited attitude he had the last time we went. Instead, he seemed to be more quiet and mostly just sat around. At one point he even said,
I want to buy something, but at the same time, there's nothing here that I want.
Although he didn't say anything at the time, I could tell Zack was a little upset about how much of the stock was gone, and the fact that people had come in and scalped most of it. It was at this point he was like me, and no longer felt the same feeling of enjoyment about the crossover video we made. Zack knew people were coming in and scalping, but he didn't think it was this bad. Thankfully he did perk up again after we left and went to the Boxcar Brew Works at Doolittle Station for dinner. However, Zack would later tell me,
Going to the hobby shop a year later, after all the scalpers came through, it was definitely very sad. There was still a tremendous amount of general model railroading stock, such as locomotives, coaches, freight cars, and other accessory pieces, but virtually a good majority of the Thomas products were gone. It was very slim pickings. And the remaining items, such as Ertl James, Annie and Clarabelle, Toby and Percy, were pretty much less valuable. And yet, the prices were raised by quite a few dollars. I can understand why the shop had to adjust its prices, but it really felt like it was too late, especially since all the people had scalped the better deals. Flying Scotsmans, Smudgers, and other characters in the portrait or Shining Time Station packaging. It was just really disheartening to know that so much of the good stuff I saw just 1 year prior was basically gone.
Now, Doolittle Station also plays a role in this story, as it would be my next reason for going back to the hobby shop. At the same time I went there with Zack and Nick, we checked out a model train display they have. This is a display that is all volunteer and donation driven and is built inside of an old New York Central baggage car. I first saw this display at a train club meeting I attended back in 2018, and I enjoyed seeing all the different layouts and trains. However, throughout 2020 up until the middle of 2022, the display had fallen into a state of disarray. None of the layouts worked, things were scattered all over the place, and it just wasn't in any state to be displayed in my opinion. I wrote an email to a gentleman named John who works at the Boxcar Brew Works, and he forwarded me to another gentleman named Bob. Now I knew Bob from when I set up with him and the local train club at a show back in Christmas of 2018, and it was great to be able to connect with him again. We discussed a lot of things over the phone about the state of the model train display and what it would take to get things going again. Bob had told me he'd been doing most of the work himself the last couple years, as social distancing in addition to other factors had limited the number of volunteers. I told him I'd be happy to assist in getting the layouts cleaned up and going again, and also volunteer my time to keep everything operational. I even knew a few people I could reach out to on my end who would be available to volunteer and help with maintaining the layouts as well. Bob really appreciated the help, so after a couple more phone calls, we agreed to meet up on the weekend of September 24th. In the meantime, I also reached out to Christian and asked if he wanted to help work on the layouts too. He'd seen the sorry state the model train display was in earlier in the year, and pretty much agreed something needed to be done about it. When also taking into consideration that Christian is into model railroading as well, and also has experience building his own layout, he certainly had the right credentials to assist Bob and I. It also gave him a good excuse to get out of the house and make a trip to Pennsylvania for the day. The three of us met up the weekend of the 24th and spent the day working on the layouts. We had a great time and managed to get things cleaned up, and almost all the layouts were functional again. One important detail to this day that I want to address is that at one point Bob needed to pick up some tools at the hobby shop, which Christian and I had gone along with him. I bring this up because it's a crucial thing to remember during the events that play out later on. In another phone conversation I had with Bob a couple days later, I brought up the poor condition some of the models on the layout were in. He suggested to me that next time I was in at the hobby shop to check with the guys about the bargain bin. This is basically a table with boxes of used model trains which are available at discount prices. Rather than spending a lot of money on models for the layouts, this was a way to obtain them at a more affordable cost. Bob went on to tell me that if I found anything I felt could work for parts or be fixed up to run on the layouts, to go ahead and get it and charge the purchase to Dr. Rice's account, Dr. Rice being the owner of Doolittle Station. I told Bob I had a trip to DuBois the following weekend, so I'd stop in at the hobby shop on Saturday. Fast forward to the weekend of October 1st, I met up with Eddie again and we headed to DuBois with the intention of spending the day at Doolittle's, but since we weren't too far from the hobby shop, Eddie wanted to swing by there and see if they had anything he might want to purchase. While Eddie was looking around, I asked one of the employees about the bargain bin and explained what Bob had told me. The gentleman pointed me in the right direction and said that if I found anything, to bring it up front and they'd get me a price. I found a few pieces of rolling stock I figured wouldn't be too bad for the layouts after a little bit of work. By this time, Eddie had already checked out and was waiting for me, so I took my handful of things up to the counter. The employees looked over everything I had and wrote up a sales slip for me, but when I tried to charge the items to Dr. Rice's account, this is where problems started to arise. The first thing I was told was that Dr. Rice didn't have an account there. I was baffled by this, so I explained again what Bob had told me, and they proceeded to ask if I had ever been in there with Bob. Again, I was a little confused because I had just been in with Bob last week, and I didn't understand how they couldn't have remembered that. I was also questioned whether or not my purchase was actually for Doolittle's and not myself, but what really pissed me off is when one of the guys accused me of trying to buy these items at Dr. Rice's expense just so I could turn around and on-sell them. Now I just want to stop right here and say a few things. I was just trying to buy 4 cheap pieces of rolling stock which most serious modelers out there would have just chucked in the trash. At most, I could see these being worth $12 to the right person, so if I were to buy these, I'm not going to make jack off of them, yet I'm being accused of trying to scalp? When the hell did this become routine? They let a complete stranger like Max just walk into the store and buy hundreds of dollars worth of discontinued items, even having numerous duplicates, and he's allowed to make his purchase and walk out of the store like it's no big deal. Yet when I, a regular and loyal customer of almost 20 years, is only doing what I'm told and trying to purchase run-of-the-mill rolling stock for a charitable cause, I basically get interrogated and have false accusations thrown at me. Since when the hell did it become appropriate for them to start treating repeat customers like common crooks? What am I honestly going to gain by trying to scalp what is basically garbage? By this point, the whole situation was just becoming awkward, and I could tell even Eddie was ready to get out of there. I decided not to make a big deal out of this or cause a scene, so I just told the guys I'd have Bob give them a call and explain things. They said they'd put my purchase behind the counter and hold it till Bob got in contact with them, but Eddie figures everything was probably put back once we left. Either way, that was the last time I will ever set foot in that hobby shop again. The way I was treated that day was unacceptable. I was lied to, I was accused of something I wasn't doing, and I was disrespected by people I'd known for as long as I'd been going to that shop. The fact I'd even brought Eddie, a paying customer, into their shop that day should have given some credibility. After all that, I honestly regret wasting my time taking Eddie there when we could have just gone straight to Doolittle's that morning. The following Monday, I called Bob again and explained to him what went down at the hobby shop that weekend. I told him that I attempted to purchase a few items for Doolittle's like he suggested, but I was unable to for reasons I've already explained. Bob wasn't happy about the way I was treated either, but he did say that what occurred was more because the owner of the shop has the boys in there scared. Apparently they were just trying to make sure they didn't do anything that would get them in trouble, but still the situation was not handled appropriately. They could have been upfront with me and explained things, rather than lying to me and making false accusations. Bob said he'd call the owner of the shop and talk to him about what happened, and then also stop in at the hobby shop and explain things to the guys in there. Either way, I had already made the decision that I wasn't going back there again. I don't care what the reason. If I've been a repeat customer there for as long as I have, and this is the thanks I get for it, then they don't deserve my business. Unfortunately, Bob forgot to call the owner of the hobby shop or talk to the employees. As of right now, it's been about 2 months since that weekend, and I doubt anything has changed. Chances are that even if Bob had said something on my behalf, it wouldn't have made any difference and nothing would have got resolved. The employees probably would have told him I was in the wrong and they had every right to suspect something. As he told me, the way I was treated that day is a good example of why they lose so much business there. As for the rolling stock I was trying to purchase, guaranteed it probably ended up back in the bargain bin at this point. Pretty much the only thing I got out of that whole ordeal was an apology from Bob, although I really don't feel he's the one who should have been apologizing to me. What went down that day was the result of numerous factors which had been leading up to that point. It was the final nail in the coffin, and that pretty much concludes the story, at least on my end of things. Sadly, everything that happened in the last year was a result of the video Zack and I made. Before any of that, the hobby shop was a far nicer place to visit. I was always able to walk in and enjoy being there, the inventory they had was plentiful and reasonably priced, and the employees talked to me like we were friends. I enjoyed going there a lot, which is why I chose to take my friends there. Even making that video was a way of sharing with my audience here on YouTube of why I enjoyed going to this hobby shop rather than a bigger commercial store or shopping online. Unfortunately, like Zack said, the right people, or the wrong people depending on how you look at it, saw that video. They went into the hobby shop, knew exactly where to look, and made off with a lot of underpriced inventory to turn around and on-sell. As I myself put it, the video got just popular enough to attract the scalpers, and that was it. That's another thing about the video that irritates me so much. In only 1 year, it pulled just a little over 300 views and barely made $2 in ad revenue. The video didn't have substantial viewership or bring in that much income, but it attracted enough attention for people to go to the hobby shop and scalp. This isn't the only case I've seen where someone makes a video about a small town hobby shop and people rush in to buy up all the good inventory. Another YouTuber I know did a video of a hobby shop they went to back in April of 2021 in Atuska, Illinois. This place had Thomas & Friends stock dating back to the early Wooden Railway, Trackmaster, and Take and Play items. Fellow YouTuber and friend Jacob K visited the same shop not even 8 months after the video aired, and all the older inventory was gone, leaving just the current merchandise on the shelves. It honestly makes me wonder how some people not only can come across these videos so easily, but then also in a short time frame come up with the time and money to travel all across the country to go to these hobby shops and buy up the stock. I also have to wonder if it's just Thomas fans who are doing this. Again, activity like this is exactly what led to the events that played out within the last year at my local hobby shop. Like I've said before, I have no interest in going back there again after everything that's happened. It was always great to walk in there and be welcomed by the employees. I always enjoyed looking around and finding something that I didn't see before to take home with me. I was happy to shop there and support a local business, but when you've been a loyal customer at this shop for so long and suddenly get accused of trying to scalp what's basically garbage, it's probably time to move on. What I enjoyed most about this hobby shop, I just don't see anymore. The same vibe is lost, and now it's like walking into a big commercial store that you've seen a million times. I've since found 2 other hobby shops that I can go to in my area, and shopping online is always going to be an option as well. Some of you may be asking, am I going to miss this hobby shop now? Absolutely. When you do business with a specific retailer for almost 20 years and enjoy going back every time, it's really hard to make the decision and say you won't be. Like I said, I came here since my childhood, and one of my first train sets was purchased from this very shop. If anything, this shop was what really got me started in model railroading, and being able to purchase more model trains and equipment here helped to propel me further into the hobby. Even after I got older and went from HO scale to large scale, I still purchased quite a few models and parts from this shop. In fact, at the time of recording this, my most recent large-scale model was purchased at this hobby shop back in August when I went with Zack and Nick. Now, I'm in no way saying that other people should stay away from this hobby shop and not do business there. I'm just saying the experiences that I've personally had with the shop over the last year doesn't make it a welcoming environment for me anymore. Maybe the guys working there were just having a bad day when Eddie and I went. Maybe there was a miscommunication between Bob and I about the bargain bin. Maybe the owner was just taking proper precautions in regards to selling his inventory. Maybe I'm being too critical over everything that happened and there's a positive side to all this. I'm just saying that if you're someone who still wants to do business there, by all means, it's still a hobby shop worth checking out. You just won't see me making videos or shopping there anymore. Although the outcome of this video was mostly negative, there are lessons to be learned here. The lesson Zack and I learned is that when you come across a honey hole of discontinued items being sold at a great price, don't post a public video about it. We should have been less descriptive about everything and not videoed as much as we did, which may have made less people so apt to go to the hobby shop and scalp. Had we done just a simple, maybe 5-minute vlog showing the shop, a little bit of their inventory, and our haul of stuff from the day, many of the things that happened probably could have been avoided. Granted, that's something we'll never know for certain, but at the very least, Zack and I wouldn't have wasted so much time on what became a 30-minute long video that went absolutely nowhere. Christian, on the other hand, learned that there's a difference between owing your friends a favor and just letting them take full advantage of you. He's since apologized to everyone for letting Max force him into taking him to the hobby shop and pushing the rest of us out. He even said he knew Max was only going with him just for his own personal gain, and it had nothing to do with wanting to spend time with a friend. Max was the older adult and should have known better, but instead chose to act like an entitled toddler every time and throw a tantrum when he didn't get his way. Christian even said that looking back on it now, he can't believe he let Max manipulate him into changing his plans just so he could get a free ride to the hobby shop. Sadly, this was another realization which just came a little too late. In regards to the hobby shop, the owner, while upset about his losses and rightfully so, should have been on top of the prices and known what he had. Things should have been marked up sooner rather than later, and after the first couple times people bought mass amounts and duplicates of items. Like Zack said, the damage is already done now. The scalpers have already cleaned out the good stuff, and marking the prices up on the common items that remain isn't going to do anything but keep them from selling. It's a hard pill to swallow, but sometimes you just have to accept that your loss is someone else's gain. At the same time, it's also not fair to try and recover your losses at someone else's expense just because of a mistake you made. As for the employees at the shop, they should have questioned some of the mass amounts of items people like Max were trying to purchase. Some of the shops I know even have regulations set in place that in the event someone tries to purchase a large volume or value of items, the transaction is frozen and requires manager's approval before anything leaves the store. Regardless who's buying what, a business has every right to not sell to someone if they suspect something. Sadly, no one questioned anything and just let the scalpers walk out of the store. Lastly, if the employees do feel there's sketchy activity going on with a customer, then there's more appropriate ways of dealing with the situation rather than just directly accusing them of something. The only ones who didn't learn anything from this were the scalpers like Max. They got exactly what they wanted and benefited greatly at someone else's expense. Sadly, that's just how a lot of this sort of thing works, and there's really nothing any of us can do to change that. In fact, scalping has become more widespread within the last couple years, and for some they've turned it into a full-time job. It's not illegal, but it isn't ethically right either. Because of all this, I can say with confidence that the hobby shop trip video I did with Zack is in fact the worst video I've ever uploaded to the channel. The video itself may not have been bad, but the choice to make it definitely had some unforeseen consequences. It started out as a fun little project with innocent intent. Its sole purpose was to be a crossover video for our channels and maybe help promote the hobby shop a little. I wanted to do a video like that on the channel for years, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity to do so. Considering I had already done a video in the past showing what I'd purchased from there before, I didn't think I had any reason to be concerned about making a video at the hobby shop. Optimistic as I was, I foolishly thought it would be one of the next big successful videos on my channel, but instead, it didn't go anywhere and just resulted in numerous conflicts and mistrust among others. Unfortunately, that video, despite not being very popular, managed to do a lot of damage. It took away the vibe that a local hobby shop once had. It destroyed an entire weekend get-together with friends, and it fueled dishonest behavior. If Zack and I had only known what the outcome of that video would have led to, we'd never have made it. If that were the case, I'm sure I could go back to the hobby shop tomorrow. I'm sure the prices would still be reasonable and the inventory would be plentiful, and I'm sure the employees and myself would still have the same amount of respect for each other. Sadly, the hobby shop is nothing more than a memory to me now. As for Zack, the last thing he told me was,
I still really enjoyed my revisit to the shop, but it was definitely not with the same level of excitement that I had just 1 year prior. I can't believe that one video caused all of this to happen.
just remember, if you want to show off a best-kept secret in your neighborhood, the smartest thing you can do is don't. Zack and I learned a hard lesson this way, and it still amazes the both of us just how out of hand things got. As for myself, whenever I'm in DuBois these days, I choose to spend my time elsewhere now. Whether it's working on the train layouts at Doolittle's or grabbing a drink at the Boxcar Brew Works with friends, I've certainly found other ways to occupy my time when I'm in the area. As mentioned before, there's also other hobby shops I can go to now, and it's just crazy the lengths some people went to in regards to all the scalping that went down at this one. It's a heavy price to pay for a crossover video that didn't really pay at all.